The short answer is no. The existence of free will, in my view, is not enough in itself to outweigh the evils that are made possible by human freedom. If we were to say that, we could end up with some really odd results. That, for example, if human beings were endowed with moral freedom, but used their moral freedom predominantly to make each other miserable, I don't think we'd want to conclude that such a world was a world worth making. We may think that that's the world that we actually live in our darker moments. But in any case, that is not what theists have tended to say. Theists have not treated freedom itself as the good for the sake of which God permits evils in the world. Instead, freedom is a necessary condition for some greater good, or is ingredient in a greater good. And that, typically for theists, that greater good is the good of relationship with God. So the good is not simply the existence of freedom, but what freedom makes possible in human life. It makes it possible for us to be persons who shape our own moral destinies and to enter into certain kinds of relationships with each other and with God. That story has to be further complicated, though, it seems to me, because Christian theologians have not thought that human freedom is uncomplicated or unproblematic. Human freedom, one way to put it is human freedom is fragile, it's breakable. And in fact, according to tradition, it has broken. So that our moral capacities are damaged in certain respects. And I think we all know that if we are candid with ourselves about our own moral lives. We find that, as Paul says, the good that I would do, I do not, and the evil that I would not do, I do. There is a kind of internal struggle that we go through in moral life that reflects in the diagnosis of the theological tradition as moral anthropology, that reflects something having gone deeply wrong with human moral freedom. So that our moral freedom is no longer adequate simply to allow us to enter into the right kind of relationship with God. Hence the theology of grace. So the picture that a free will defense can use a really truncated and limited version of freedom because a defense has such limited goals. It aims simply to show that there's some set of conditions under which God's power and goodness is compatible with the reality of evil in the world. But a free will theodicy, which actually tries to give a helpful explanation of why God would create a world that includes the kinds of evils we see around us, must work with a richer and more complex, more multidimensional conception of freedom that has built into it this an acknowledgement of moral fragility, moral brokenness, and the need for the restoration of our freedom through God's free grace. So free will is not enough in itself. There's a whole lot more to the story.